Hi everyone, and welcome to Core Lecture 22. Today we'll discuss strengthening your arguments through warrants. Before we begin, you'll need the following materials for today's lecture assignment. You'll need access to your Week 12 homework document and access to your Project 3 annotated bibliography materials. The purpose and goals for today's lecture are as follows. We'll examine the specific role of warrants in argument-based academic writing. We'll explore the structure of warrant composition, and we'll understand the importance of developing clear warrants in argument-based academic writing. All right, so warrants, what are they and what kind of role do they play in writing? Now, when we think of the term warrants, I don't know about the rest of you, but for me, my mind automatically goes towards police procedural dramas or shows like Cops or Live PD, and you oftentimes hear this word get thrown around quite a bit. Oh, do you have a warrant to search this car or this house, or you have a warrant out for your arrest. And of course, those are very valid ways to understand the term, but it does have its own understanding when we think about it within the realm of writing, more specifically academic writing. So when we think about it in that respect, we can come to think of warrants as the part of your writing that interprets the data and shows how it supports your claim. To put it another way, this is the connection you make between your original argument and the evidence you're citing to support that argument. A good way, I think, or a good way to visualize, I think, what a warrant is and what a warrant does, is it really can be seen as a bridge between your ideas and your support or evidence. And in fact, we can even tie that back to its use in more procedural crime dramas or law enforcement related shows. When we hear the term warrant thrown around, it's okay, we want to search this car because of this reason. So they are saying, okay, based off of our observations or based off of the evidence that we've gathered, this is how we are interpreting this data, and this is why we want to search this car or search this house or whatever the case may be. And so within academic writing, sort of returning us to that focus, warrants in academic writing answers the questions, why does this even matter and why was this evidence included? So with Project 3, with your annotated bibliography, you sort of got at that in your annotations to say, okay, and I can see, this argument or this evidence really helping me make the, support my argument in this way, or it provides this kind of support for the method that I want to pursue, or it helps me explain, this reason that I'm providing my reader. And so you've already started to do that in Project 3, but in Project 4, since it is a cohesive, extended academic argument, of course, the warrants will be a bit longer and you have the opportunity to really dig into them and say, okay, this is why I introduced this source. This is why I focused in on the conclusions that they reach or the argument that they make, or for whatever reason you're citing that source. All right, let's talk about the values of a warrant. So warrants, I would say, are among the most valuable components in academic writing. And here's why. It allows you to connect your ideas to the evidence in your own words. So it allows you to basically make sense of the evidence that you have presented within the context of your own argument, and it returns your reader's focus to what you're suggesting. It also helps ensure your readers understand the connection in the way you as the writer intended. So, if you present me, me as the reader, certain evidence, but you don't really connect it clearly as to how you see it fitting back to your argument, I, as the reader, might say, oh, okay, I get that. They introduced this source for this reason, and this is how it speaks to their argument. But if I told you that, you might come back and say, no, that was not how I intended for that to be understood. But if we have a clearly developed and well-established warrant in the text itself, you are basically telling your reader, okay, you just read this statistical data, or you just read the conclusions from this survey that the authors that I'm citing discuss. This is how I see it specifically fitting into my argument, and this is how I see it contributing to the point that I'm trying to make. Now, I think what this really comes back to, and why I think warrants are so important, is because it ensures your voice remains dominant and not your sources. I would say, especially in academic writing, that is one of the biggest issues writers often have to overcome, is that, you find a number of these great sources and they back up what you're saying, but then at the end of the day, if you do not remind the reader what your argument is and why that source was introduced to support that argument, then really what you have is just sort of this Frankenstein's monster, sort of a paper where you're saying, okay, I'll pull in a little bit from source A and a little bit from source B and a little bit from source C. But if you're not contextualizing all of those works within the context of your own argument, then you're just sort of left with, with what a bunch of other sources are saying, loosely strung together. But if you are able to say, okay, yes, here's a little bit from source A, and here's why it's relevant. Here's a little bit from source B. Here's why I'm talking about it. Here's the role that I see it playing. Then you can ensure that your argument, your own thoughts and ideas remain at the forefront of the reader's mind while they're engaging with your work. Okay, let's talk about developing warrants now. When we think about where a warrant fits in academic writing, it should immediately follow your citation of a source. So in the past, we've sort of looked at it as like this statement of relevance. Okay, so why am I talking to you about that? Recall even back to your project one, your rhetorical analysis. Now, you weren't making an argument for anything, and so you didn't necessarily had a warrant, but you had a statement of relevance there saying, okay, I have identified these certain terms in the text, and I believe that they show how the author is appealing to ethos in ways 1, 2, and 3. And so you weren't just saying, okay, well, here are a few emotional terms, or here's a few ways that the author establishes credibility or applies to logic, right? So you didn't just leave it at that. Rather, you said right after, okay, here's how I see it fitting in. Warrants do the same thing, but in this context, you're not analyzing, you're arguing. So it should immediately follow your source of a citation and sort of take on that role of a statement of relevance, but sort of emerge into a fully fleshed out warrant. Now, I really love Vanderbilt University. Their writing center really explores what warrants are and the way that they function within academic texts. So, and I think when they define what a good warrant is, they hit the nail on the head. So according to Vanderbilt, they say that a good warrant will be a reasonable interpretation of the facts. It will not make illogical interpretive leaps. It will not assume more than the evidence supports, and it may consider and respond to possible counter-arguments. And so really, when we think about what a warrant is, it's our opportunity to say, here's what I'm seeing from the data. Here's what I'm seeing from the conclusions. Here's what the source is telling me. However, in doing so, we cannot allow our sort of creative juices, our interpretations to really run away with us. We want to make sure that we are staying true to what the original source said. So you don't want to put words in your source's mouth, so to speak. You do not want to suggest to your reader in your warrant that they're saying something that they're really just not saying. So you want to make sure, and I think that this is a common theme throughout anytime you use a source in academic writing, you always want to be true to what they're saying. We've, looked at the same thing, or we've discussed this concept in certain ways when we've talked about paraphrasing a work or summarizing a work. Anytime where we are using someone else's words and we're sort of crafting them to fit our own ends, The big thing is you still want to be accurate with what the author originally said, and warrants are no different, especially because they are, you're tying it back to your argument, and you want to be sure that you're doing that on the most truthful, ethical ground possible. So let's look at an example of a warrant. So let's look at a thesis, we'll look at evidence, and then what a warrant might look like. Thesis: all abled Americans over the age of 18 should be required to serve in one branch of the U.S. military for at least 2 years. Okay, so we've got our thesis, which is our argument or our topic plus our point of view, and this would sort of in theory guide our entire argument paper. So as we're going through, we have specific reasons, and to support those reasons, we include evidence. So to support the thesis and perhaps a smaller reason that fits within that thesis, we could say, recent studies conducted by the Swiss government, a country which does mandate citizens to serve in the military, reported that requiring service allowed citizens to develop key professional skills. Okay, so we've got some evidence. We're citing the Swiss government here to say, hey, look, if we do require all able-bodied Americans to serve in at least one branch of the military, they're going to develop professional skills, right? So we can see how that evidence, we're already starting to make connections about how that evidence might fit in and support the thesis, but we always want to have that warrant there so the source doesn't speak for us, and so that way we can ensure that our argument is still the center of the reader's focus. So we want to develop a warrant, and so for this example, that warrant could read, this study indicates that required military service not only benefits the country's domestic and foreign engagements through a larger body of servicemen and women, but it also shows that those who do participate in required military experience or required military service are able to develop skills that will help them personally and professionally after their service has ended. So we have been able to see, okay, in our own, in my own words, if I've got this thesis that all able-bodied Americans should serve in one branch of the military, here's why I think that evidence from the Swiss government is important. Here's why I think it speaks to my overall argument or my overall thesis that I have presented to the reader. So for your lecture assignment, here's what I would like you to do. I would like you to review the sources or evidence you plan to use to support your thesis in Project 4, which is going to be your civic engagement argument. Most of this, I imagine, you can pull from Project 3, but of course you are welcome to review the sources that you have gathered since. So Project 3 sources are fair game, but so is anything else you have found since. I'd like you to select one source and compose a brief write-up that reflects how you would integrate that source into your own writing. So think about it. Would you summarize this source? Would you use a direct quote, or would you paraphrase? After you've cited that source, compose a warrant that helps your audience understand the relevance of the source to your own argument. So after you've summarized, after you have, used a direct quote or paraphrased, compose a warrant that basically says, all right, here's the argument that I'm making, here's why I decided to cite this, and here's the bridge between this source and either the specific reason I've provided or the overall thesis. So for the weekly homework, what you'll need to do then is include the core lecture 22 summary and assignment in your week 12 homework submission. Overall though, week 12, the homework submission for week 12 should include the summaries and assignments for core lectures 22 and 23, as well as a mini lecture of your choice. Now, all of this is going to be due to Canvas before 11:59 p.m. on Sunday, November 10th. If you have any questions or if you'd like to chat about these ideas in greater detail, please do not hesitate to contact me via Canvas DM. All right, everyone, until next time.